Welcome to Canada's podcast.
Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's podcast. Joining me today on British Columbia podcast is Raelene Bergen, who is founder and CEO of Origin Leadership. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
All right, let's talk about Origin Leadership. Tell me a little bit about what that is and what you do.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Origin has been around for a few years now. When I initially wanted to start a business or thought, I'd be doing something more intentionally with my work, I looked around and saw that there was a lot of really great coaches, consultants, advisors, educators, business people who are doing impactful work, but they were doing it alone. And I thought, what would it be like if we pulled some of these amazing talents under one roof as independent consultants looking for bigger and more meaningful projects that we could work on together. So essentially pulling our skill sets together and making it project by project based on what the client needs, rather than a lot of organizations who have their team and that's what the client gets. In our view, we put the right teams together for that particular client.
Okay, so how did you get involved in this kind of work?
I think I took a bit of a twisty pathway to get here. I did spend many years at home raising my children. I worked, but more on entrepreneurial endeavors within our family. So my partner and I have a visual effects company that we've had for 26 years now, and that's his primary work. But all through those years, I was working on client relationships, getting things set up, but I didn't really look at it as my business or even a skill set that I had. I didn't realize until much later on that connecting the right people was really something I was quite good at. And later on, I started looking at entrepreneurial endeavors of my own. So I had a cheesecake business. I really loved restaurants and food businesses. But it wasn't until my family was sort of more independent that I looked at what do I want to actually do? And it led me to understand that a lot of entrepreneurs were struggling to do things on their own. I ended up going and getting a master's degree in leadership studies later on. I didn't start that degree until I was 47 years old. Yeah. I had no education before that. I went right from no education into a master's program. So I was able to skip over the bachelor because I had a lot of work experience by that point. But I just really focused on one project at a time. I started by coaching and working with small businesses, small entrepreneurs who were trying to really make a difference. And I had some experience doing that. And so that's how it started. And I started seeing it in a bigger way and how organizations really needed the fire that independent consultants and entrepreneurs have. And when we pull that together, we really had something special.
Now, tell me a little bit about this whole area of coaching and consulting for businesses. I am curious on a personal level, right? Because I have a friend of mine who keeps telling me, he said, you should go see a business, a coach. Tell me why it's important for an entrepreneur to have someone like that.
Yeah, well, certainly it's important to know the difference between coaching and consulting. There is a difference. Coaching is very much about the personal experience, right? You're working towards something in your own mindset, your own understanding of what you want and where you need to go, where consulting is bringing a specific toolkit or skill set into a project, right? So as a coach, and when, I needed a coach, I think that's just life, right? Whether you call them a mentor or a coach, but a coach is someone who's really there to keep you accountable, to help you move forward in the initiatives that you've set out, and often to help you set those initiatives. I think we live in a kind of world it's really easy to become scattered and it's really easy to become discouraged. And when you really want to get somewhere, especially at my age, I'm almost 53 years old, and I don't feel like I have time to play at different ideas or different things. And I think there just comes a point in a person's professional journey where you have to make decisions, and you want those decisions to be based on accurate, objective, a real solid foundation. You need that anchor point. And a coach is really good at helping people find that, because we often don't see our own strengths the way someone else did. And I'll give you an example. When I was raising 5 children, I was helping my husband build a business. And I just have to say that he has an animation and visual effects business. And in Canada, that wasn't a real thing when you lived in small town Saskatchewan, which is where we were at the time. We had to make that work. We had to make that education, because unless he was willing at that time to go to Vancouver or Toronto, he couldn't be educated in it either. And doing those things, having smaller entrepreneurial ventures, all of those things, when I got to the point where I wanted to make a business, I never considered those as strengths. I never realized that all the things I had been doing in my personal experiences and professional experiences, I never realized how important they would be to building a business. So we often dismiss our best qualities. We don't understand what our strengths are. And I think a good coach can do that for you, can really help you identify the anchor points that you can build your business from.
What was the toughest thing for you in becoming an entrepreneur yourself?
Mindset. Truly, and everybody says it. We all have imposter syndrome. It's just a fact, but it really is getting past that. And I sometimes joke that it was almost a blessing in many ways that I didn't have the education at the time, because I often say I didn't become an entrepreneur because I wanted to be one. I became one because nobody would have me, right? I didn't have the business background or education to go just slip into a already existing role. I had to make one.
Stay ahead of the game with our expert tips and strategies that will help your business thrive in a digital era. CanadasPodcast.com. Subscribe now.
What do you think? It's kind of be a little bit of a weird question, but
I love those.
Raising children. What did you think you learned through that experience that is helpful for you as an entrepreneur?
I think I can say this now that my kids are grown, but I think one of the things that I really learned is how everything is a progression. When you're right in it, you don't see the forest through the trees, right? Yeah. And I think I learned a lot of patience. I learned a lot about my own temperaments and my own gifts, right? I couldn't identify them maybe at certain points, but the biggest thing in my work that I contribute to my kids is I always want to show them courage. I always they're the example, right? If I could start a business, go back to school at 47 years old, make a business, which is now quite successful in Canada, and I did that, started it with no education, started it with no real business background, just had the guts and the courage to take one step forward, learn the next thing, talk to the next person. And I think that's the example I want to set for my kids, that they can look at their own lives and say, I can do hard things. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs or people trying to establish themselves don't always believe they can do the hard things. And so I think that's a big lesson I've learned, not just from raising kids, but also as I look to what kind of example do I want to be.
Yeah, I guess, your experience shows that you're never too old, or it's never too late to learn and learn something new and do something different in you.
I always say this, and I said this to myself, do I want to live the next 20 years the same way I lived the last 20 years? And if I don't, right, am I just hanging up my hat at 53 years old and saying, man, where I am is where I am? I have a lot of life left to give. And I think even older entrepreneurs or business people don't really always understand the experience they have can really support other people,
Where do you think that comes from inside you, that you were able to do what you did?
I think, like anybody, I have the same mindset issues, right? But I knew that if I didn't do it for me, nobody else was going to. So I've said this to clients before. The emotional pity party or the imposter syndrome isn't going to serve me. It's not going to make me move forward. It's going to keep me stuck, but it's still a reality of what we have to face. And so I always say, when I open my office door in the morning, my emotions have to stay outside of it. When I come into my office, I do my work. If I need to go have a pity party at lunchtime or a coffee break, great. Do what you got to do. But I have to treat myself like a business, because if I don't, nobody else is going to.
Yeah. It's hard to know. It's hard, though, to separate emotions, right, from things.
It's really hard. And I think it's the key. I think if you ask any entrepreneur, and I'm sure you have with the podcast, but I would imagine that for most entrepreneurs, it's what makes us good at what we do, but it also is what can keep us stuck.
Yeah.
You know, entrepreneurs are creative thinkers. All entrepreneurs are artists. If they weren't, they couldn't keep going. They couldn't do it, you know?
Yeah. What do you love about what you do?
I love the kinds of clients. We work for a lot of social causes. We work a lot with Indigenous nations. I love that. But I really love that the types of consultants we partner with for different projects, they're not always the most educated. They're not always the most business savvy, but they are the most experienced for that client, because I understand that my life experience contributed in many ways more to the effectiveness I have with clients than my education and my business. So I see that in other people, and I can pull them into projects. So they're being nurtured as they're supporting the client. And I think a lot of businesses or business people just dismiss the moms, dismiss the people who don't have the typical credentials. And I don't dismiss that. I look at it and see how can we nurture that and foster that for the betterment of not only that consultant, because it's giving them quite a bit, but also the client.
Yeah. What would your advice be to young people who are thinking of becoming entrepreneurs, or even, at some point, say your children want to be entrepreneurs? What would you tell them?
The functions of a business, any business, the day-to-day things, you can learn those things. Spend time on your time management, your mindset. Like, be super intentional about those things, because that will move you forward. And I love the concept, and I don't know who said it, so I can't accredit it to anybody. But if you just did a little bit every day, if you did 10 minutes every day on your mindset, on your business, on the planning, in a year, you would have so much done. And I don't believe that you just have to quit your day job to start your own business or to be a coach or consultant. I think if you have a great day job, or you have even an okay day job, but it pays your bills and it gives you some stability, start small and work your way up to the thing you really want. It's
tough, though, isn't it, just to not get caught up in the day-to-day grind, and without having that ability, or to take some time off to do some of the things you were mentioning, work on your mindset, or work on your say time management or planning or whatever. Like, what suggestions would you have to people to help them facilitate that?
Yeah, I always think back to in the 80s when I was growing up, and everybody around me had a full-time, they went to school full-time and had a job full-time. They did the evenings and weekend job. And I know, like, the people my kids' age and those generations don't look at it that way. It feels too busy, right? It feels like they don't give themselves enough time then for rest and personal growth and all those things, which there's balance, of course. I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. But I think if you are intentional about your time, and you can carve that 10 minutes out a day to make sure you go the extra way to get a Starbucks. People do carve time out for what they really want.
Yeah.
And my point is, I think planning is a form of procrastination. And I think that's a huge problem with people who want to have their own thing, but they get stuck in the planning. It feels too big because they won't break it down into the small steps. I raised 5 kids while I was trying to figure out how to do things. Then as I was building my business, I went to university for 2 years to get my degree, right? Like I never want to dismiss that people are busy and they have time. There's always too many things to do, but your life could be significantly different in a year if you just committed 15 minutes. Getting a coach or getting a mentor or somebody who's done it to help you kind of make the steps is probably really helpful and keep you accountable to those steps. But I think a big problem is people think it's too overwhelming and they have to plan forever in order to make anything happen. And it's just not the case.
Canada's podcast is your gateway to success in the world of entrepreneurship. Start listening today. canadaspodcast.com. Subscribe now.
So in terms of time, obviously you're quite busy with the business and obviously with family. What do you do to relax? What do you do for yourself? Everybody talks about that work-life balance out there and how important it is. Are you able to find some of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. That's one thing I'll say as an entrepreneur. I like what I do. I really like what I do. And so I just recently had this conversation with my mother-in-law at Christmas because she's saying, Raelene, you're working all the time. Like, why don't you take the evening off? And I realized that I had to reframe what I call it. I have my day job, which is Origin Leadership. I work with my consultants. I work with our team. But then I have my fun job, which is the courses I like to build. It's the things I don't have time to do when I'm working with the clients. It's the extra things. I'd love to write a book. I'd like to, and so I like to do those things. I also paint. It's blurred out, but I just enjoy, it's the 5-year-old in me. I like the messy abstract artwork. But my husband and I are we raised 5 kids. We lived in suburbia. We did all those things. And we decided when they were moved out, we wanted to have a home small enough so they couldn't move home. And what I mean by that is we sold everything. We bought a Jeep. We put a rooftop tent on it, and we traveled all over Mexico back and forth. We lived and worked out of that Jeep for 2 years. Wow. Now we are building out a van to do the same thing. A big part of my work is a cultural based if you get sort of into the weeds of what we are really proud of, it's understanding culture and how that merges with better business. And so I actually travel a lot. I was in Scotland last year with First Nation elders. I went there as they were doing cultural teachings with the Scottish Knowledge Keepers and invited me to come along and participate in that. This year, I'm going back to Scotland and to Greece, and I'll be hoping to do some of those connections again as I'm there. So I enjoy that part of it, traveling and learning more deeply about cultures that are about the how do you say it? They're more about the we first than the me first, way of looking at life and business. So I'm an active learner in those areas.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about, obviously, like you embarked on a journey in your life that you were able to do what you wanted to do. You know what I mean? And made decisions. What would you say to people, out there who are kind of stuck? They're stuck. They want to make a change, whether it's professionally, maybe personally, et cetera. What advice would you give them on what to do and how to do it?
Well, maybe the obvious answer is call me, but but if that's not going to happen, I think the word stuck is very important. And I think people really are in that space. And you're right. It's not just about work. It's relationships. It's understanding, do you want to make a big decision? Do you want to move something forward? And I would say the biggest thing is to not overthink it. Take your step. You're going to be in the exact same spot in a year if you don't do anything different. And ask yourself, do you want to live the next 5-10 years the way you lived the last 5-10 years? And if not, what's the small action steps you can take to change it? And sometimes it's very helpful to look at people who've done what you want to do and break down the steps they took. It's nothing is rocket science except for rocket science. But I mean, these are just the people do this every day. People move forward every day. So if someone's really finding that they're stuck and challenged, get a coach or get a mentor, talk to somebody who's done it. Sometimes a therapist is really good. If the reason you're stuck is based in things from your past that you're really struggling to understand, a coach isn't right for that. A coach is very much about how do you take where you're at and move it forward. So I would say just really look at who's the right type of help that you need and just take steps, just move it forward.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Raelene, for joining us today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, that was Raelene Bergen, who is founder and CEO of Origin Leadership. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, and today was Vancouver's and BC's podcast. Thanks for joining us.